What is the one thing in a real estate transaction that quite often doesn't have the same value to a buyer as it does to a seller? The one thing that can be worth tens of thousands of dollars to one party and possibly nothing to the other. There's really only one element of a real estate transaction that has this sort of amorphous value. It's seller concessions. Seller concessions can be the entire reason why a buyer pulls the trigger while potentially having zero to little consequence to a seller. If you're in escrow on a purchase, negotiating for seller concessions can often be the surest path to gain instant equity. I'll give you an example. Say you're in escrow with a seller who owns two properties right next to each other. One he's selling and the other one he's keeping. Right on the other side of the one he's keeping is the beach. And let's say you're able to get the seller to agree to grant you an easement to walk through an open alley on the side of the property he's keeping, to get straight to the sand whenever you want. It doesn't cost the seller anything to do this, but now you have beach access and a property that's worth quite a bit more than it was before. Possibly in return for something like not asking for a discount on the price after finding his patio cover not being permitted. This type of seller concession could turn an otherwise so-so purchase into a home run. Now, obviously, this is a unique scenario, and I'm using it because it's easy to visualize. But let's imagine a more vanilla transaction. Let's imagine a seller selling a typical single-family suburban home to a buyer that has plenty of cash to buy it. Let's say the property is 25 to 30 years old, but generally in good condition. On the MLS, it's beautifully photographed, staged to perfection, and maybe even freshly renovated. In this scenario, even in this scenario, the buyer is going to have an opportunity to capture value from seller concessions. Without a doubt, there's going to be some sort of deferred maintenance, something that's not compliant with current building codes, some portion of the home that hasn't been braced or bolted for earthquake safety, something that, if discovered, would have to be redisclosed to the next buyer to come along. The buyer just has to find it. And once he does, he'll gain quite a bit of leverage. With a home that's 25 to 30 years old, the best place to start looking for this sort of opportunity is the roof. In our hypothetical scenario, let's say the roof's underlayment is shot and the plywood deck has started to show signs of deflection. The buyer is going to have a few options. Option number one, he could ask for the roof to be replaced prior to closing. This would basically be an even trade with the seller. The seller would pay some amount to replace the roof, and the buyer would get this value in return. Option number two, maybe better yet, the buyer could present a bid to the seller, ask for a concession to fix the roof, and then try to fix it for less after closing. This might give the buyer a slight edge, as he would potentially capture more value than what the seller was giving up. Finally, option number three, likely the buyer's best play. Ask for a concession to fix the roof post-closing, but then apply those funds to something different, a solar integrated roof. A solar integrated roof could be subsidized with a 30% tax credit and state-sponsored financing. If the buyer went this route, he could swap out his monthly cost of electricity for an equivalent monthly payment on his solar roof, and he could put all the cash from his seller concessions in his pocket. Plus, he could gain a bunch of added property value from getting a new solar roof. You might call this capturing instant equity, all from a seller concession. A buyer's greatest opportunity to capture equity often comes from negotiating seller concessions and then leveraging those concessions into something more valuable than what the seller perceives he's giving away. If you'd like to learn more about how to build equity using strategies like the one I just discussed, please check out the link below.